The worst lies aren't told to other people. They're the ones we whisper to ourselves just to make it through another day. The rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Rossini's Italian grill, turning the Chicago skyline beyond the glass into a blur of silver lights and shadows. I adjusted the cuff of my long-sleeved black uniform for what had to be the 10th time that evening and forced another smile as I balanced a tray of sparkling water glasses on one hand. Friday nights were always busy. The dining room hummed with conversations, clinking glasses, and the rich scent of garlic, basil, and fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. To everyone around me, I probably looked normal. Just another waitress working a late shift. Just another 25-year-old woman trying to pay tuition and survive another week. But normal was a costume I had become very good at wearing. Underneath the sleeve of my uniform, hidden from curious eyes, faint marks colored my skin in shades I didn't want to think about. The fabric covered everything neatly. As long as nobody looked too closely, nobody would ask questions. And if they did, I already had the answer prepared. I slipped between tables, delivering drinks and memorizing orders while pretending my chest didn't tighten every time my phone vibrated inside my apron pocket. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. The same name, the same messages, the same cycle I kept telling myself would somehow get better. "Hannah, table 14 needs refills," my manager called. "Got it," I answered quickly. My voice sounded cheerful enough. Practice made perfect. As I crossed the dining room, I caught my reflection in a polished wine cabinet. Blonde hair tied back neatly. Blue eyes. A professional smile. For a second, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked exhausted. Not physically. Something deeper than that. The kind of tiredness sleep couldn't fix. I looked away before anyone noticed me staring. The dinner rush intensified. Every table was full. Every server moved faster. The noise rose and fell like ocean waves. Then the atmosphere shifted. It happened so subtly that most people probably wouldn't have noticed. Conversations softened. A few heads turned toward the entrance. Even my manager straightened his posture. I followed everyone's gaze without meaning to. A group of men entered the restaurant. Dark tailored suits. Quiet confidence. The kind of people who never seemed rushed because the world adjusted itself around them. The man at the center moved calmly, his attention sweeping across the room for only a second before returning to the hostess guiding him toward the private dining section. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark hair. Maybe mid-30s. There was nothing flashy about him. No loud entrance. No demand for attention. Yet somehow every person noticed him anyway. I looked away immediately and returned to work. Men like that belonged to a different world. Wealth. Influence. Power. None of it had anything to do with me. My life existed between classes, rent payments, and double shifts. Whatever story surrounded him wasn't part of mine. At least that's what I thought. 20 minutes later, while carrying a tray loaded with drinks through the crowded dining room, I felt my sleeve catch slightly against the edge of a chair. The fabric shifted. Just enough. Just for a second. Long enough for skin to be exposed before I pulled it back down. Long enough for someone sitting across the room to notice. I didn't see it happen. I didn't know a pair of dark eyes had followed that single movement. I didn't know my carefully constructed lie had just begun to fall apart. And I definitely didn't know that before the night was over, someone would look directly at me and see the truth I had spent months trying to hide. The rest of the shift should have felt ordinary. Orders. Refills. Polite smiles. Instead, I could not shake the strange feeling that someone was watching me. Not in the uncomfortable way some customers did. This felt different. Focused. Intentional. I carried a tray of appetizers toward the private dining section and carefully avoided looking in that direction. The less attention I attracted, the better. That had become another survival habit. Blend in. Stay quiet. Keep moving. A burst of laughter came from table 8 as I delivered another round of drinks. Someone thanked me. Someone asked for extra bread. I welcomed the distraction. Normal conversations were easier than my own thoughts. My phone vibrated again inside my apron pocket. Once. Then twice. Then a third time. I ignored it. The knot in my stomach tightened anyway. By 10 o'clock, the dinner rush finally began to slow. The rain still streaked the windows outside, turning the city lights into rivers of gold and white. I slipped into the service station near the kitchen and exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. "You look exhausted," Maria said as she rolled silverware beside me. "Long week." I forced a smile. "You should take a day off sometime." I laughed softly. "When nursing school starts paying my rent, I will." She smiled and returned to her work. I wished life were that simple. A few minutes later, my manager asked me to deliver an espresso and dessert to the private dining room. I grabbed the tray and headed down the quiet hallway. The farther I walked from the main dining room, the quieter everything became. Thick carpets absorbed every footstep. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers overhead. I stopped outside the private room, balanced the tray, and pushed the door open. 4 men sat around the table. Conversations paused as I entered. The man from earlier sat at the head of the room. Dominic Moretti. I did not know his name yet, but somehow the room seemed to revolve around him. He looked up as I approached. Calm. Expressionless. Observant. I placed the espresso beside him and set the dessert plates down one by one. My hands remained steady. Years of restaurant work had taught me that much. I turned to leave. Then the tray shifted slightly. Instinctively, I reached to steady it. The movement pulled my sleeve back farther than I realized. Only for a second. Maybe less. But it was enough. The room fell strangely silent. I looked down and quickly adjusted the fabric. Heat rushed into my face. When I glanced up, Dominic was no longer looking at the espresso. His dark eyes rested on me. Not on my face. On my wrist. My pulse stumbled. Every instinct told me to leave. Immediately. Mississippi. His voice was low and controlled. I stopped before reaching the door. Yes, sir. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable. Not hostile. Just deliberate. Like he was deciding something. Finally, he leaned back slightly in his chair. Thank you for the service tonight. Relief washed through me so quickly it almost made me dizzy. Of course, I replied. Have a good evening. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. But even after it clicked shut, I could still feel the weight of his gaze. And for reasons I could not explain, I had the unsettling feeling that the man inside that room had seen far more than I ever intended anyone to see. The restaurant finally closed a little after midnight. The last guests drifted into the rainy Chicago night while the staff wiped tables, stacked chairs, and counted receipts. Normally, I loved this part of the evening. The quiet after the storm. The moment when I could stop pretending for a few minutes. Tonight felt different. Every time I remembered the way Dominic Moretti had looked at me, my stomach tightened. Not because he had been rude. Quite the opposite. He had barely said anything at all. Yet, somehow I felt more exposed than if he had asked 100 questions. I finished polishing the final row of wine glasses and slipped into the employee break room. My phone sat on the table where I had left it charging. 7 missed calls. 4 text messages. My chest immediately grew heavy. I stared at the screen without opening anything. Sometimes the anticipation felt worse than the actual messages. I slipped the phone into my bag and grabbed my coat. Home was only a 15-minute drive away. I told myself everything would feel normal once I got there. Outside, cold rain misted across the empty parking lot. Streetlights reflected on wet pavement like scattered gold coins. I hurried toward my aging Honda Civic, keys already in hand. Halfway there, I heard footsteps behind me. Not fast. Not threatening. Just steady. I turned and saw one of the restaurant security guards walking toward his own vehicle. Relief flooded through me. I laughed quietly at myself and climbed into my car. The windshield wipers pushed away the rain in slow rhythmic sweeps as I pulled onto the road. Downtown Chicago glowed around me. Traffic had thinned to almost nothing. For the first time all day, I was alone with my thoughts. Unfortunately, that was usually when the doubts arrived. Maybe I really was overreacting. Maybe everyone had difficult relationships. Maybe things would improve if I tried harder. Those thoughts had become familiar companions over the past year. I repeated them so often they almost sounded true. A red light stopped me at an empty intersection. I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired blue eyes stared back. A woman trying very hard to hold her life together. The light changed. I continued driving. By the time I reached my apartment complex, the rain had intensified. Water streamed down the building's brick exterior. I parked, gathered my things, and hurried inside. The hallways smelled faintly of old carpet and someone's late-night cooking. Home. Safe. At least that was what home was supposed to feel like. My apartment was dark when I entered. Quiet, too. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment. The silence should have comforted me. Instead, it felt fragile. Like something that could disappear at any second. I tossed my keys onto the counter and finally looked at the messages waiting on my phone. My thumb hovered above the screen. Before I could open anything, another notification appeared. A new text. The display lit up the kitchen. I stared at the words for several seconds. Then I slowly lowered the phone. For reasons I could not explain, Dominic Moretti's face suddenly flashed through my mind. The calm expression. The observant eyes. The unmistakable feeling that he had seen straight through every excuse I had ever told myself. And for the first time, I found myself wondering what would happen if someone refused to believe my carefully rehearsed answer when I said everything was fine. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Chicago disappeared behind low clouds that seemed determined to press the entire city closer to the ground. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself replaying moments from the restaurant. The silence. In that private dining room. The way Dominic Moretti had looked at me. Not with pity. Not with curiosity. With certainty. As if he already knew something I had not admitted to myself. By 7:30, I was back on campus for clinical training. Hospital corridors smelled of coffee, disinfectant, and exhaustion. Patients needed care. Instructors demanded focus. Normally, those things helped quiet my thoughts. Not today. My phone remained silent throughout the morning, and somehow that felt stranger than the constant stream of notifications from before. During lunch break, I sat alone near a window overlooking the parking garage. Rain tapped softly against the glass. For 10 peaceful minutes, nobody needed anything from me. Nobody asked questions. Nobody expected answers. Across the city, in an office high above Michigan Avenue, Dominic Moretti reviewed reports spread across a polished conference table. Numbers. Contracts. Meetings. The usual demands of power. Yet one detail continued pulling his attention away from everything else. A waitress with tired blue eyes and a rehearsed smile. Most people overlooked details. Dominic built his life by noticing them. The slight hesitation when someone spoke. The nervous adjustment of a sleeve. The difference between confidence and performance. By noon, he had quietly asked a trusted associate to verify a few facts. Nothing unusual. Nothing invasive. Just information. The results arrived faster than expected. Hannah Parker. 25 years old. Nursing student. Part-time waitress. Excellent academic record. No criminal history. No financial scandals. No obvious problems. On paper, she appeared remarkably ordinary. Dominic studied the file for several moments. Then he noticed what was missing. People living stable lives usually left stable patterns. Predictable routines. Consistent records. Hannah's file contained small gaps. Frequent address changes. Missed semesters. Employment shifts that seemed disconnected from her academic performance. Individually, none of it meant anything. Together, they formed a pattern. A pattern that suggested someone constantly adapting rather than building. Surviving rather than living. He closed the folder. His instincts rarely ignored details without reason. Later that evening, I finished class and headed toward the hospital parking structure. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean beneath fading sunlight. As I unlocked my car, I noticed something tucked beneath the windshield wiper. My stomach immediately tightened. For one terrible second, I expected another message I did not want to read. Instead, I found a simple business card. Thick white cardstock. Black lettering. Elegant. Minimal. One name. Dominic Moretti. Beneath it sat a phone number. Nothing else. No explanation. No instructions. No demands. Just a card. I stared at it for a long moment while traffic hummed in the distance. Most people would have thrown it away. Maybe I should have. Yet something about the gesture unsettled me more than any direct confrontation could have. Because for the first time in a very long time, someone had offered help without asking for anything in return. I slipped the card into my bag and climbed into my car. All the way home, I told myself it did not matter. It was just a business card. Just a name. Just a phone number. But deep down, I knew that was not true. Because that small piece of paper felt less like an invitation and more like a door quietly opening somewhere in the distance. For 3 days, the business card stayed hidden inside the front pocket of my bag. I never called the number. I never threw it away either. Every morning I told myself I would forget about it. Every night I found my fingers brushing against the thick cardstock as if I needed reassurance that it was still there. Life continued moving forward whether I was ready or not. Classes. Clinical rotations. Double shifts at the restaurant. Bills waiting on the kitchen counter. The familiar rhythm of survival. Yet something had changed. It was subtle. Difficult to explain. The card represented a possibility I had not allowed myself to consider in a long time. The possibility that help could exist without conditions attached to it. Thursday evening arrived with another cold rainstorm rolling across the city. The restaurant filled quickly as people escaped the weather outside. I tied my apron, forced a smile, and stepped onto the floor. Around 7 o'clock, Maria appeared beside me carrying a tray of drinks. "You look better today," she said. "Really?" I asked. "A little." She smiled. "Less like you are carrying the entire world on your shoulders." I laughed softly. If only she knew. The evening passed faster than usual. Orders blurred together. Conversations blended into background noise. Then I noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. My heartbeat skipped. I told myself it meant nothing. Chicago was a large city. Expensive cars existed everywhere. Still, when I glanced through the rain-streaked window 20 minutes later, the vehicle remained there. Not moving. Just waiting. A strange uneasiness settled into my chest. Near closing time, my manager called me into his office. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed a bouquet resting on the desk. White lilies. Elegant. Expensive. "These were delivered for you," he said. My stomach tightened immediately. There was no card attached. No name. Nothing identifying the sender. I stared at the flowers without touching them. Beautiful things should not have made me nervous. Yet somehow they did. I carried them home anyway. They sat on my kitchen table while rain tapped against the apartment windows. The scent filled the room. Soft. Clean. Peaceful. For a few minutes, I almost felt normal. Then my phone buzzed. A new message appeared on the screen. No greeting. No explanation. Just a simple question asking where I had been after class that afternoon. My blood ran cold. I looked around the empty apartment. The lilies suddenly felt less comforting. More like a reminder that someone, somewhere, was paying attention. My eyes drifted toward my bag hanging beside the door. Toward the hidden business card tucked inside. I sat motionless for a long time. Listening to the rain. Listening to my own breathing. Then, for the first time since finding it beneath my windshield, I pulled the card out and placed it on the table beside the flowers. Dominic Moretti. A name. A number. Nothing more. Yet somehow seeing it there made me feel slightly less alone than I had an hour earlier. The next 24 hours felt like walking across thin ice without knowing where the cracks were. I carried the business card everywhere. In my pocket during class. In my bag during work. On the kitchen table when I was home. I never called the number. I told myself I did not need to. Yet every time my phone lit up unexpectedly, my eyes drifted toward that small white card. Friday afternoon brought another steady rain. Gray clouds hung low over Chicago as I finished a long clinical rotation and headed back to my apartment. The moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. Nothing obvious. The furniture sat where it always had. The lights worked. The windows were locked. But the air felt different. Heavy. Tense. I set my bag down and noticed an envelope resting on the kitchen counter. No stamp. No address. Just my name written across the front. My pulse immediately quickened. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats. No insults. Just a list of places I had visited during the week. The hospital. The university. The restaurant. My favorite coffee shop 2 blocks from campus. Every location was accurate. Every time was correct. My hands began to shake. Someone had been watching. Not once. Not accidentally. Consistently. Methodically. I lowered myself into a chair and stared at the page while rain tapped softly against the windows. The apartment suddenly felt much smaller than before. Much less safe. My phone buzzed. Another message appeared. This time there was no question. Only a statement reminding me that people should not keep secrets from those who care about them. I read the words 3 times. Then I locked the screen and placed the phone face down. For several minutes, I sat completely still, listening to my own heartbeat, listening to the storm outside, trying to convince myself everything would be fine. But the lie sounded weaker than it ever had before. Across the city, Dominic Moretti stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office overlooking Lake Michigan. Evening darkness had begun settling across the skyline. One of his associates entered quietly and placed a folder on the desk. "The situation is escalating," the man said. Dominic opened the folder and reviewed the latest information. The details confirmed what his instincts had already suspected. Hannah Parker was not in immediate physical danger. But she was living beneath constant pressure, constant monitoring, constant fear disguised as normal life. Dominic closed the folder and stared out at the city lights. He rarely involved himself in personal matters. Experience had taught him that most people refused help until circumstances forced them to accept it. Yet something about Hannah's situation continued to bother him. Perhaps it was the exhaustion behind her smile. Perhaps it was the fact that she still showed up every day despite carrying burdens nobody else seemed to notice. Meanwhile, I remained seated at my kitchen table long after sunset. The envelope lay beside the flowers. The flowers sat beside the business card. 3 objects. 3 choices. Pretend everything was normal. Continue surviving. Or finally admit that I was no longer handling things alone. My eyes settled on the phone number one last time. Then, before I could change my mind, I picked up my phone and entered the digits. My finger hovered above the call button for nearly 30 seconds before I finally pressed it. The ringing sounded impossibly loud inside the apartment. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the line connected. Dominic Moretti. His voice was calm, steady, as if he had been expecting the call. Suddenly, every word I had rehearsed disappeared. I stared at the rain sliding down my window and struggled to speak. "This is Hannah." Silence. Not awkward. Just patient. "I know who you are, Hannah." Something about hearing my name in his voice made my chest tighten. Not from fear. From relief. The kind of relief that appears when someone finally acknowledges a burden you have been carrying alone. "I am sorry to call so late." "You do not sound sorry." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I looked at the envelope still sitting on the kitchen table. "I think I need help." The admission felt strange. Heavy. Honest. For years, I had convinced myself that asking for help meant failure. That strength meant handling everything alone. Yet the moment the words left my mouth, I felt something inside me loosen. Dominic did not rush to answer. "Tell me what happened." So I did. Not everything. Not all at once. Just enough. The messages. The envelope. The growing feeling that someone was watching every move I made. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, the apartment felt unusually quiet. "Are you alone right now?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." I frowned. "Good. Because I need you to do exactly what I say." His tone remained calm, but something beneath it had changed. Focus. Precision. The voice of a man accustomed to solving problems. "All right. Lock every window. Leave the lights on. Do not answer the door for anyone tonight." A chill ran down my spine. "Do you think I am in danger?" Another pause. "I think someone wants you to feel afraid." I looked toward the dark parking lot outside my apartment building. That is not very comforting. It was not meant to be. Strangely, the honesty helped more than reassurance would have. Dominic was not telling me comforting lies. He was telling me the truth. What happens now? I asked quietly. Now I make a few phone calls. The confidence in his voice felt immovable, like a stone wall standing against a storm. For the first time in weeks, I believe someone might actually know what to do. We spoke for another 10 minutes. Nothing dramatic. No promises. No grand declarations. Just practical questions and clear instructions. When the conversation finally ended, I stared at the phone for several seconds before setting it down. Outside, the rain continued falling across Chicago. Inside, the apartment looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. The flowers remained on the table. The envelope remained where I left it. Yet everything felt different. Because somewhere in the city, a man with sharp eyes and endless resources now knew my secret. And for reasons I could not explain, that thought allowed me to breathe a little easier. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated once. A single text message appeared on the screen. 3 words. Stay where you are. I stared at the message while thunder rolled faintly across the city. Then I noticed headlights turning slowly into the parking lot below my apartment. My heart began pounding the moment I saw the headlights. 2 black SUVs rolled slowly into the parking lot below my apartment building, their beams cutting through the rain like pale knives of light. For a second, I wondered if I was imagining things. Then the first vehicle stopped directly in front of the entrance. A second later, my phone vibrated again. 1 message. Look out the window. I did not realize I was holding my breath until I exhaled. The driver's door opened. A tall figure stepped into the rain. Even from 4 floors above, I recognized him immediately. Dominic Moretti. He stood perfectly still beside the vehicle, one hand in his coat pocket, completely unconcerned by the weather. Rain soaked the pavement around him. He barely seemed to notice. The sight made no sense. Men like him did not personally show up for people like me. Yet there he was. Real. Present. Looking up toward my building. My phone rang before I could process the moment. Hello. Are you looking out the window? Dominic asked. Yes. Good. His voice sounded exactly the same as it had over the phone earlier. Calm. Controlled. Certain. What is happening? I whispered. I told you I would make a few phone calls. Despite everything, a nervous laugh escaped me. That was your solution? It was the beginning of it. I watched several men exit the second SUV. Unlike Dominic, they moved with obvious purpose. Professional. Alert. The kind of people who noticed everything. Suddenly my apartment no longer felt isolated. For the first time in weeks, it felt protected. You came yourself? I asked. I wanted to make sure you were safe. The simplicity of the answer caught me off guard. Nobody had said those words to me in a very long time. Safe. Such a small word. Yet hearing it felt strangely emotional. I swallowed hard and looked away from the window. You did not have to do this. Yes, he replied quietly. I did. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. The rain continued tapping against the glass, while city lights shimmered beyond the parking lot. Finally, Dominic spoke again. Pack a small bag. I blinked. What? A few days of clothes. School materials. Anything important. Every instinct immediately resisted the idea. I cannot just leave. You can. His voice remained calm. And tonight you should. I walked slowly toward the kitchen table and stared at the flowers, the envelope, and the business card that had started everything. Just days ago, Dominic Moretti had been a stranger sitting in a private dining room. Now he was standing outside my apartment offering something I had not felt in months. Stability. Not promises. Not empty reassurance. Action. Real action. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I looked back out the window. Dominic remained exactly where he was, waiting patiently in the rain. Not pressuring me. Not demanding anything. Simply waiting for my decision. And for the first time in a very long time, choosing to trust someone felt less frightening than continuing to trust my own fear. The penthouse overlooked the city like something from another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline, thousands of lights stretching into the darkness beyond Lake Michigan. I stood there the next morning holding a mug of coffee and watching the sunrise paint the clouds gold. For the first time in months, I had slept through the entire night. No anxious phone checks. No sudden fear. No feeling that someone was watching every move I made. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that heals parts of you that nobody else can see. Dominic was already awake when I entered the kitchen. He sat at the long marble island reviewing documents while sunlight spilled across the room. Somehow he looked exactly the same as he had at 2 in the morning. Calm. Focused. Unshakable. He glanced up as I approached. You slept. It was not a question. I did. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. Good. I sat across from him and wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. What happens now? Dominic closed the folder in front of him. Now you finish nursing school. I blinked. That is your plan. You worked too hard to quit now. I stared at him. For days I had expected complicated answers. Grand strategies. Endless discussions. Instead, he spoke. About my future as if it were the simplest thing in the world. As if it were obvious that I deserved one. The following weeks passed quietly. The messages stopped. The unwanted attention disappeared. The constant pressure that had followed me for so long slowly faded into memory. Dominic never demanded explanations. Never pushed for details I was not ready to share. He simply remained present. Consistent. Reliable. Some days we spoke for hours. Other days only a few minutes. Yet somehow I always felt safer knowing he was there. Spring arrived in Chicago before I realized how much time had passed. Trees along Michigan Avenue began to bloom. The cold winds softened. Life moved forward. One afternoon, nearly 3 months after the night I made that phone call, I walked across the graduation stage and accepted my nursing degree. The auditorium erupted with applause. Families cheered. Cameras flashed. For a moment, I stood frozen beneath the lights. Not because of the diploma. Because for the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. Truly proud. After the ceremony, I spotted Dominic waiting near the exit. He held a bouquet of white lilies. The same flowers that once made me nervous. This time they made me smile. He handed them to me without a word. Thank you, I whispered. His eyes met mine. The same eyes that had looked past every excuse from the very beginning. You're welcome, Hannah. Emotion tightened my throat. I laughed softly and shook my head. You know what is strange? What? I looked down at the flowers and then back at him. That night at the restaurant, I kept telling everyone I was fine. Dominic's expression softened. I remember. But I was not. I know. The answer came without hesitation. Without judgment. Without pity. Just truth. We stood there together while graduates and families flowed around us. The afternoon sun warmed the city. Somewhere nearby, church bells echoed across the streets. And for the first time, I understood something important. Sometimes the people who change your life are not the ones who rescue you. They are the ones who see the pain you worked so hard to hide and refuse to pretend it is not there. Because healing begins the moment someone looks at your smile, hears you say you are fine, and quietly answers, I know you are not.